Well, we've been working through Psalms in the last couple of weeks, and I asked John, what I asked him first was, could I do lament? And he said no, he was going to do that, and I'm like, nuts. So I picked the Psalm of Remembrance, Psalm 77, which has been just a great one for me over the years, and I think is a good one for us as we spend some time in this psalm. This psalm deals with the reality of a life of faith in a way that few psalms tackle. We're going to see Asaph, the author, deal with despair, despondency, and frustration that we all face at times in our life as we walk the Christian life. It is the passage, not sure if you know this or not, that inspired the poem Footprints in the Sand, and that has been a comfort to many for years. One night I dreamed I was walking along the beach with the Lord. Many scenes from my life flashed across the sky. In each scene, I noticed footprints in the sand. Sometimes there were two sets of footprints, and other times there were one set of footprints. This bothered me because I noticed that during the low periods of my life, when I was suffering from anguish, sorrow, or defeat, I could only see one set of footprints. So I said to the Lord, you promised me, Lord, that if I followed you, you would walk with me always. But I've noticed that during the most trying periods of my life, there have only been one set of footprints in the sand. Why, when I needed you most, you have not been there for me? The Lord replied, the times when you have only seen one set of footprints is when I carried you. So for many of us over the years, it could be new to some, but it's been an encouragement for me. So as we approach Psalm 77, we're going to quickly realize that something has shaken Asaph, I would say to the core, so bad that it physically affects him. Psalm 73 to 83 are attributed to Asaph's authorship, and Asaph served as a singer, a seer, and a worship leader during the reigns of David and Solomon. I would love to know what the situation Asaph is facing. But honestly, I think it's better that we don't, because it would draw our attention away from his struggle. He doesn't hold back. He's pretty transparent about the struggle. His memories, as we will see, are in conflict with his current reality. There has not been any mercy, it appears, for a long time. And God seems to have rejected both him and his people. When he compares his life in the past with the present, his memories of the past begin to drag him down. They depress him and keep him from being comforted, because where is God? It was so good, but it ain't good now. And the psalm divides in two sections, verses 1 through 9 and 10 to 20. And each of these break down into three smaller pieces, and we'll work through it that way just to keep me on track. And I think we have a tendency when we read scripture in a psalm such as this, at first glance we go, wow, what a great psalm. We think this was written in a few moments, and it might have been, but I think we fail to realize that this experience of Asaph, I'm going to say, took many days, many weeks, or months to walk through. This just wasn't, Lord, I can't sleep. Thank you very much. Oh, you love me. Let's go to work. I think Asaph is chewing on something going on in his life or in the life of Israel, and it takes him a while. And I would dare say anybody in this room, with rare exception, if you haven't had sleepless nights wondering what the heck God is doing, then you haven't been a Christian very long. But I promise you it's coming. You're going to get hammered, you're going to get floored, and you're going to go, what is going on? But before we get there, I want to share a story, and John asked me to share this story about, I'll say, my 5-month stretch with Asaph in Psalm 77. When I retired from the Navy, which was 20 years ago, by the way, I know I'm old, my desire really was to teach in a college or university as an adjunct faculty and be involved in a church setting as an associate pastor. Never had my eyes on being a senior pastor or anything. As a chaplain, we were staff officers. We worked for captains and admirals and generals, and our job was advisement and taking care of the needs of the sailors or coasties or Marines. We were in California upon my retirement, began to look for a job there, and just came to the conclusion that staying in California would not be a good option for our family for many reasons. And so I was in contact with a church in Tennessee that we had attended probably 7 or 8 years before that, when I was stationed there as a hospital chaplain. And as I'm talking to them, they go, "Hey, we'd love you to come." It was a church about 12 or 1,400. They had 2 other associate pastors, a lead pastor, and they go, "If you come, would you be kind of the administrative, executive pastor?" Because as they were growing, they just needed to get some systems in place and just to get them to be more efficient. So I need to tell you, it was good because we're going back. I mean, we're going to a new church. We're going to people we knew, and it was an exciting time. So I moved in October of the year I retired, and Shirley and Amanda, Chelsea was already at Grand Canyon, and Kristen was in school at the Master's College. They came to Tennessee, Memphis area, that spring. And this is the first thing I learned in that church, that nepotism is alive and well. I didn't even know what it was. I never heard of nepotism before, because in the Navy, there's no nepotism. Your son doesn't become your lieutenant. It's not true. But in this church, 2 of the pastors each had a daughter, and they were full-time on the staff. And that proved to be a struggle as we went forward, because one had a baby, and she'd bring the baby, and he would cry all day long in the whatever they put babies in when they're little, and she would just sit there and take care of them. Anyway, that's a story for later. So I learned about nepotism, and then I learned nepotism, by the way, is granting of an advantage, privilege, or position to relatives or friends in an occupation, in this case, the church, which I had never experienced. And then I learned that there were significant financial issues. I had an inkling, which I was tasked, track down, we got to pull the budget in. We got to get things together. So I don't know how many credit cards there were out there, maybe 20, 25 church credit cards. So one by one, I'm going, "Thank you very much, thank you very much." No, I'll take that right now. So we took those in to kind of slow down the flow, because it was really flowing of money going out. And then I sat and talked. We had a business manager, and he and I had a heart-to-heart talk, confidential talk, and I said, "Jimmy," my name's Jim. In the South, you're Jimmy. They didn't call me that. But anyway, I said, "Jimmy," I said, "what's up with the senior pastor's budget? I mean, he's blowing it out." And he got real quiet, and he goes, "Well, at the end of every month, when he's short on money, he comes in and he asks me, 'How many miles is $300? How many miles is $500? And so, at least for the 18 months I was there, and long before, he was falsifying mileage request. When he was short of cash, he'd fill that baby out, sign it, and Jimmy, whose wife I think she had MS, was deathly afraid to say anything, so he just paid him the cash, and this went on for years. And the other thing he would do is he would take people out after church. They do church in the evening in the South. He'd take 20 or 30 people to dinner and throw it on a church credit card every Sunday. So that's the background, and I was in that church for a total of 18 months, just so you know. So around month 15 or so, I got called into the senior pastor's office, and his name was Johnny, and the conversation, shortened of course, went like this. He said, "Jim Ellis," call you first and last name many times, "Jim Ellis," he goes, "You know, you like black and white." You know, I'm sitting there going, "Yeah, I like black and white, right, wrong, yes, no," keeps it pretty simple. He goes, "I love country grays." I'm like, okay, didn't have a response for that one. And then he said something like, he didn't use the word passionate, I don't think he knew that, but it was, "Jim Ellis, you are passionately intense about those things." I said, "Yeah, I like right and wrong. I like yes or no. I want to keep it straight and narrow. And his comment was, he goes, I like country casual. So he was a guy who loved grays and loved country casual. And I agreed. And I agreed, shook my head, left the conversation, not understanding that that was the death knell. The bell was ringing and I didn't even hear it. So a few months later, the other two associates and myself, we were called into an elders meeting, and we were to bring our plan for moving the church forward, again, still tightening things up and assess the church where it's at. And so I was first to go. I went in, I had 3 PowerPoints, had some handouts, laid out my thoughts, and here you go, guys. And I don't know, 10, 15 minutes, I'm out the door and I went home. The next 2 associates came in and they handed a piece of paper to the elders that said, Jim Ellis has got to go. That was it. So at the end of that meeting, they voted, and they had 6 elders, and the elder board split down the middle. 3 younger guys, I'll say, voted for Jim. 3 older guys go, no, he's got to go. And the lead pastor leans back in his chairs and he says, bros or brothers, he goes, this is why I have a vote. Because if we ever get stuck and we're split, he goes, I'll make the final vote. And so, of course, he voted. Jim Ellis is out. So that night, I got a call from one of the elders who resigned. And he said, the good old boys, 3 of us resigned. The good old boys stayed. And he said, you're going in tomorrow morning and getting fired. Just thought I'd give you a heads up. And so the pastor never did it because he was too afraid to. So we had an elder at that church we called the elder of death because he's the guy who fired everybody. So I went in, there's the pastor, there's the elder of death, and they go, Jimbo, you got to go. And not that way. They just go, you were the last hired, first fired, done. We'll give you 1 month's pay. Thank you very much. And so as I walked out, I'm standing in the office there were 3 secretaries, and there was an unpaid staff associate. And they go, what happened? I said, I got fired. And 2 of the 3 secretaries stood up, pulled out a box from underneath their desks, loaded the desk, and walked out. And the other associate, who was unpaid, he was a very wealthy fellow, goes, you got room in your truck for my stuff? I said, I do. Let's load it up. And so off we go. So I went home and told Shirley, and our church family was gone, and we would not return to that place of worship again. But I must tell you, I did go to church the next Sunday because I had to find out what he was going to say. And sorry. Lord, thank you. And I sat way in the back. It was, like I said, about 1,400, maybe 700 people in that service. So I sat in the back row. He could see me because the back rows kind of went up, but I didn't wave. And and he saw me, and he was gracious, or whatever the word I would say. He was not demeaning at all. So anyway, that began a 5-month journey of motorcycle riding, which I have one. I've only had one, in western Tennessee, which is a unique place. Backcountry roads have picnic tables just stuck on the side of the road. I mean, it's not a major highway. It's not a rest stop. It's just a picnic table. And so from May till September, I regularly, probably 4 or 5 times a week, got on a motorcycle because, yes, I had Navy retirement, I will say that, but it wasn't enough when you have 1 in high school and 2 in college. You could hear the bank account going, it was leaving and it wasn't going in. So the Lord and I rode a motorcycle, and we sat together on picnic benches in the middle of nowhere, working through what am I going to do next. And I had no idea. I'm going to finish the story and get moving. Oh, yeah. Anyway, 5 months later, got a job at Union University as a director of a program, and the Lord was gracious. But those 5 months were tough. So here we go, Psalm 77. The title for my psalm, or the big idea, is memories are to be shared for God's glory. That as we walk the Christian life and experience it, we have to share our memories with our family, with others, especially the hard times. Because to think the Christian life is bubbles and just so wonderful is wrong. It's foolish because it's not. Because Satan didn't give a rip about us until we came to Christ, and now he doesn't like us at all, guaranteed. So here is the psalm laid out for you. Asaph's troubles are the first 9 verses. We're going to look at his cries in the night, dark memories of bright days, asking the hard questions. And then we'll see in the middle of the psalm a distinct change when he begins an upward journey, when he begins to think correctly and begins to make right choices and does his faith well. In the first 6 verses, I need to tell you this. I'm always counting, yous and I's and words. So in the first 6 verses, the personal pronouns I or me appear 18 times. He is focused on, Lord, what is going on here? Okay? And in the last 6 verses, 13 through 20, the personal pronouns are gone, and there are 21 mentions in those 6 verses of God and no personal references to himself. No judgment intended on Asaph, because we've all been there when it's, Lord, what is going on? I can't find you. So Asaph's trouble, verses 1 and 2, it says this: I cried out to God for help. I cried out to God to hear me. When I was in distress, I sought the Lord. At night, I stretched out untiring hands, and my soul refused to be comforted. You might be saying, been there, done that, got the t-shirt, I can relate. And as I said before, we need to share our stories. They are valuable to others when they face difficult times. Tell your story. I love table storytelling. There's not a better place to talk with your kids, grandkids, folks, your RC, sharing those things. I will say that in the men's monthly meeting, or in our men's meetings, we've had men in the last 4 or 5 come and share part of their story, and then how they've learned and grown through that. And we've had some remarkable transparency from some of the men who have come and sat and talked to us. They've been very encouraging. So we need to share those stories, definitely. Second part of this section is dark memories of the bright days. Asaph says, I remembered you, O God, and I groaned. I mused, and my spirit grew faint. You kept my eyes from closing. I was too troubled to speak. I thought about the former days, the years of long ago. I remembered my songs in the night. My heart mused, and my spirit inquired. Sometimes as we remember memories, they make us groan. Sometimes it's because of things we blew. Like, I don't want to think about that for a while. And sometimes because, man, those were great times of ministry, great times of family life. And sometimes when we have the ones that begin to accuse us and our current reality is not mixing well, they don't encourage us. They seem to accuse us of things. John mentioned last week the importance of music in our growth and in the Psalms and how powerful it is. And here, though, as Asaph reflects, he's talking about, I remember those songs in the night, and they're not helpful. Because what's happening to me now, when I compare that to them, man, my crisis is crumbling around me, and the memory of music that once brought me joy doesn't do that anymore. And what happens in this period is they cause questions, and these questions need to be asked by all of us as they come and answered, because it requires due diligence on our part. When we ask questions like this that we're going to see, we need to work the text. We need to work what the word says. And here they are. The third part of this first section is verses 7 through 9, asking the hard questions. He says, then I thought to this, he says in verse 7, will the Lord reject forever? Will he never show his favor again? Has his unfailing love vanished forever? Has his promise failed for all time? Has God forgotten to be merciful? has he in his anger withheld his compassion? Good questions, honest questions. Ones that, as we experience hard times in our life, we can't be afraid of asking. I mean, Kristen, a 40-year-old, 7 days old, has a kidney failure in one of her kidneys. Wakes up screaming, pulled down diaper, doesn't look good, blood out the door, and began a 4 or 5 year journey of many things. Yeah, there was some serious questioning going on during that time, Lord. What is up with what's going on here? I wrote down in my notes, too, that my mom died probably just at the beginning of COVID, and she had all her money invested with a Shearson Lehman guy, and then this guy decided to go independent, which he did, and 3 years later, she lost 80% of her, I don't know, she had about $1.5 million, that's what she had, gone, because he became a day trader, thinking that he could just multiply, and all he did was just multiply debt. And then one day she got a letter and just said, he's turned himself into to the state authorities, and 5 years later, we went to court and watched him get 2 years in a work camp. And he ruined hundreds of families' lives because he thought he could make money. And my mom had been a believer probably 50 some odd years by then, and these questions were ones that we talked about. Eugene Peterson, in The Message, offers an interesting take on those, and they'll show up here in a minute. I just want to tell you this, because some people go, The Message by Eugene. Yeah, it's a single-man translation, there's no doubt about it. But in my reading about Eugene in the past few years, I learned that he was on track to get a PhD in Semitic languages from Johns Hopkins University. He had finished his coursework and was beginning to write his dissertation, and God called him to be a pastor of a church. So Eugene planted a church in Maryland and pastored that church for 30 years. So when Eugene translates Hebrew, I think he's pretty good at it. So here's what here's his interpretation of these verses. You got it. So will the Lord walk off and leave us for good? Will he never smile again? Is his love worn threadbare? Has his salvation promise burned out? Has God forgotten his manners? Has he angrily stomped off and left us? Just my luck, I said. The high God retires just the moment I need him. I thought that was funny. But anyway, so I'm like, yeah, Eugene takes these verses, and I may really put a lick on them, perhaps, on those. So that's Asaph's issue, his problem. He's where he's at. And then beginning in verse 10, he begins his upward journey. And it begins with what I call constructive biblical meditation. In verse 10, he says this, "Then I thought, to this I will appeal. The years of the right hand of the Most High." That means this, I don't do this very well because I'm 70. But anyway, I mean, this is like, we're going to look at God's right arm. We're going to look at his power and his reputation. He goes, "I will remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I will remember your miracles of long ago, and I will meditate on all your works and consider all your mighty deeds." So this is the last place we're going to see those eyes, because he's beginning to make a change in his mind, and he's beginning to turn toward the Lord. Biblical meditation is not mindless sitting. Okay, Lord, I'm waiting for it. Just drop it in my lap. Come on. It is not that at all. It's active. It's engaging the heart and mind. It's choosing to remember, choosing to meditate, choosing to consider the ways of the most holy God. The term right hand of God appears often in the Psalms, in the entire Scripture. The right hand of God gave the law. It led the people through the sea, which we're going to see here in a minute, and it protected them from harm. So the right hand of God is very symbolic of God's protection and power and care for us and for the Israelites. So he appeals to examine what he knows about God. He's not, I wanted to say this. I don't know if Asaph did this, but I would say for us, I'm not a journaler unless things are going bad. So if things are good, Forgive me, this is confession. I don't have time. Anyway, but when things get bad, out come my journal, and buddy, I'm smoking. You can see the pen burning as I'm writing across the pages, because I'm like, Lord, what's going on again or in this situation? So let me ask you to consider doing some journaling, especially in times like this, because if we don't put our thoughts down on paper and struggles, our minds become like a merry-go-round that just continues to gain speed and eventually drills itself, and it just blows up. We have to get the hard thoughts, the hard things out of here and on the paper. So that way we can put the journal down and walk away and go, I'll get back to that later. I don't want to read any more of that stuff. I've thought about it for weeks, but it's there. And then as we work through who God is, we can begin to put some of those concepts, some of those thoughts down, and now we can take the journal and see what was and then what is, and begin to compare what our troubles were and what God's answer is to that. You remember what Paul said to all of us in Philippians 4. He says, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. When we have remembered the deeds, the miracles, and mighty works of God and recorded them, we can look to the Lord honestly and limit the effect of our emotions and circumstances on us. And it brings us perspective. It helps us begin to find the answers. Thinking, remembering, meditating help us align our hearts and minds correctly on the Lord. So I always recommend a few books. So here's number one for those of you who are waiting patiently. So, new book by Ann Voskamp came out this year. It is called The Waymaker, okay? We're going to sing that song. They're not associated, that I can tell. When I read the book, Ann never quotes the song, and certainly the song was written before Ann wrote her book. In this book, Ann chronicles her married life and then an event in their life where she and her husband adopted a little girl from China. So they had 5 kids, I believe, maybe 6, and they adopted this girl from China. And Ann Voskamp, if you haven't read her, you need to. She's very good. She's always very transparent. And Ann Voskamp shared an acronym based on the word sacred, which will show up here in a minute. And this is how Ann ordered her life up to the point of adopting this little girl. When circumstances and emotions and difficulties overwhelmed her, she clearly says, I stopped doing sacred. And this is her sacred. It's stillness to hear God, attentiveness to see God, cruciformity to reach out to God, revelation to see God, examine my own heart before God, and doxology, thanksgiving to God. Now, I'm not saying this is the one you should use, but if you have your own format, perhaps, to remember, to meditate, to spend, to use, then do that. But I thought this was very interesting, especially in light of the fact, in the book she goes, I stopped. And it looks like she stopped sacred for probably 2 years. From the time they really got into adopting this baby and all these things, it could be a year, but it looks like it's much longer. And then she shares in the struggle with adoption and her husband, they're not getting along. They're in a bad place. How she confesses to him, repents, resumes sacred, and they come together. Again, her hubby had, culpability in this. But when she stepped away from reflecting on who God was, it ate her lunch. And I think that's what makes the book so good. I mean, because you're going to read and you're going to go, oh, whoa. Ann Voskamp, you got your Christian life together. She does now. For a while, it wasn't two together. So time of biblical meditation. leads to good theology, and that's what happens to Asaph. His examination in 10 to 12 leads him to this conclusion: your ways, O God, are holy. What God is so great as our God? You are the God who performs miracles. You display your power among the peoples. With your mighty arm, you redeemed your people, the descendants of Jacob and Joseph. So that's the setup for the Exodus, which we're going to hit in a minute. But I think Asaph identified at least three attributes of God here. And again, his words, his language shows the change of focus in his life from circumstances and emotions to I'm going to focus my eyes on God's work as seen in the last 8 verses. Asaph's attention is now on the Most High. His honest questioning and meditation led him to good theology. So the first one that Asaph identifies is that God is holy. In verses 11, 12, and 13, whatever God does is upright, though we don't understand. Asaph's view of the past teaches him that God can always be trusted to do the right thing, even when we don't understand it. The second thing that Asaph sees is that God is great. In verses 11 and 12, Asaph focused on God's deeds and miracles and his works, and then mighty deeds. This leads him to ask a question, rhetorical: what God is so great as our God? The implied answer is none. He repeats that Israel's God performs miracles, displays power, bears his mighty arm. God is not only upright, your ways O God, are holy, but he is also able and does put all his decrees into action. And thirdly, Asaph identifies that God is caring in verse 15. How do we know God's caring? It's because he redeemed his people from bondage under Egypt. God is caring as well as powerful. He can be counted on to work in each detail of history for his people's good. And this means even allowing Asaph to struggle, which was ultimately part of his loving plan for Asaph. And the last thing that the writer Asaph identifies is God, our Redeemer and Shepherd. The water saw you, O God, the water saw you and writhed. The very depths were convulsed. The clouds poured down water. The skies resounded with thunder. Your arrows flashed back and forth. Your thunder was heard in the whirlwind. Your lightning lit up the world. The earth trembled and quaked. Your path led through the sea, your way through the mighty waters. Though your footprints were not seen, you led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. Exodus 14 is a riveting passage. I've been reading the Old Testament over the last few weeks, and every time I see that passage, it's just an amazing thing to listen to what is written and recorded. And I'm going to get this in, so let me do this. So another book for you, bookies, is a book called The Novel of God by Walter Wangerin. And by the way, Walter Wangerin passed a few years ago, but he was in a group called the Chrysostom Society, which was made up of himself, Eugene Peterson, Philip Yancey, Richard Foster, Madeline Leengel, Lucy Shaw, and Marilyn McIntyre. And they met for years to discuss each other's works and give critiques of their books. I really think our imaginations have to capture the moments of Scripture in their fullness to keep it living and active, penetrating to our hearts and minds. And that's why I want to just share with you a short passage by Wangerin in his book called The Novel of God. And Wangerin has taken the Old Testament, the whole Bible, and made it a novel, okay? So it's true to the basic format of the Bible, but he's inserted people and responses that we could really identify with, and here's one of them. While Israel was encamped near the sea, a young woman happened to notice a tiny puff of dust near the distant fort called Migdal. Soldiers, she thought. She squinted, and what she saw comforted her. They're riding away. Just before these months of upheaval, she had married a man named Carmi, a good man of the tribe of Judah, but then the river had turned to blood, and the heavens went to war, and the poor woman was never able to savor her marriage, not till now. Now they were free, and the wife of Carmi often went out alone to gather firewood. Then she would wander farther and farther from camp, heedless and completely happy, because she was huge, soon to bear her first child. One afternoon then, just as she knelt to pull up some dry roots, a flash of light caught her eye. She stood up and peered westward. There was another tiny flash, and she thought the Egyptians are riding away. But then she saw the entire horizon from north to south was seething with an angry yellow dust. Another flash, another metal-reflecting sunlight. Now it seemed to the woman that the earth itself was trembling, and the wind blew odors of leather and sweat, and that metal, it was weapons. The sun was striking the helmets and spearheads and the bright side of the Egyptian chariots. She dropped her few sticks, turned and ran back to the camp as fast as her big body could go. Egypt, she's screaming, Egypt, the soldiers are coming to get us. Just like that, their freedom was gone, a lie, an illusion. And by the time she reached her people, the woman was wild with sobbing. Her terror was like an arrow in the heart of the Israelites, who lifted their voices in wailing. The people looked and saw the armies of Egypt. They saw yellow dust stretched like a curtain across the west, but the east was blocked by water. They were caught between swords and the sea, and though Egypt was still distant, their skin already tingled for the whips and the arrows to come. They found Moses and screamed at him, "Why did you bring us here? To kill us? Weren't there graves enough in Egypt to bury us in?" Moses turned his back on the accusers, climbed a solitary rock, then raised his arms and shouted, "Silence, Israel. Be silent, be still. Don't try to fight. Do nothing at all, but watch and see how the Lord will defend you today." "Do nothing?" Israel thundered. "Nothing? You need only be still." Moses cried, "Because the Lord will fight for you." The Lord? Where is the Lord? For all his signs and all his wonders, here comes Egypt again. "Look," Moses cried, "look." He was pointing at the pillar of cloud. It was moving. It had risen above the people and now was sailing westward through the blue air. At the same time, it was spreading wider and wider, a thick gray curtain, higher and lower at once, like a wall between heaven and earth. The children of Israel were struck dumb by the sight, for the cloud had divided Egypt and Israel one from another. And the rest of the story continues that Moses strikes the water, splits the sea, Israel crosses, and then Egypt sees they can have a way to get to them. They get into the middle of the sea, the wind stops, and the seas collapse. And Egypt, the Egyptian army, is no more. So I think we often read the Bible and go, Exodus 14, well, that was good, and really don't get the rise that it demands in our life to see God save those people. Of course, the greatest act of redemption in the Old Testament was the crossing of the sea. And in a moment, as we begin to close, we're going to celebrate the truly greatest act of redemption as we remember and participate in celebrating the Lord's Supper. I want to offer a statement gathered from excerpts from the book of Hebrews as we begin to move toward our close. In the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets at many times and in various ways, but in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, and through him, he also made the universe. The Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. After he had provided purifications for sins, he sat down at the right hand of God. Since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in our humanity, so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by the fear of death. Christ as the faithful son over God's house, and we are his house if we indeed hold firmly to our confidence and the hope and glory which we have. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize or empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. Let us then approach the throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. Would you bow with me for prayer? Jesus, we're grateful for the Exodus. We're grateful for the stories of old, Lord, that strengthen our faith, that challenge us to be more like you, that challenge us to be honest and transparent with the Lord God. Lord, help us to be men and women who look to you when we don't understand you, to look to you with our hearts and our minds and in your word, to find the answers, Lord, that are there for us, our encouragement, and to help others along their life's journey. Lord, we're grateful for a chance to remember not only our salvation, but also your son Jesus, Lord, as we approach this table. Thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.